Okay, so it's right after 10 o'clock and we're going to go ahead and get started. If you just let me know in the chat box if you're able to hear me, that would be great. My name is Christy Croft and I'm the Prevention Education Program Manager at the North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and I'm super excited to have you joining us today. If you're not familiar with NCCASA, we are an inclusive statewide alliance working to end sexual violence through education, advocacy, and legislation. We use a social justice framework, so our work is done from a strong intersectional social justice perspective. We do this so that we can center marginalized communities because we know that that is a way to make sure everybody's needs get met and that everybody gets served. A lot of our work involves organizing and sponsoring statewide trainings related to sexual violence. We're the primary technical assistance and training provider for all of North Carolina's rape crisis centers, many of whom are also dual DV agencies, and some of whom also have child advocacy or human trafficking programs, and we provide them with resources, support. We also do legislative agendas and policy change at the local and national level. We have a strong anti-human trafficking program, and we do prevention education for communities and youth and also on campuses. We start every workshop by acknowledging that not all women are victims, not all men are harm doers, that anyone of any gender can be a victim and anyone of any gender can be a harm doer. Today you're going to be joining us for the overview of K-12 prevention curriculum, and it's going to be me and our program evaluator, Anna Wallen. My name is Christy. Again, my pronouns are they, them. This webinar is part of our Powerful Prevention webinar series. You can find the links to all of those webinars on our website. The ones that we've done so far, you can also view the recordings on our YouTube channel. The ones we've done so far, we've done a Prevention 101, we have done Trauma-Informed Prevention, and we have done a Logic Models 101. Today is the overview of K-12 prevention curriculum, and then next month we're going to be doing a webinar on program evaluation. Here's what we're going to do today. We're going to start by reviewing what prevention is and what we mean. We are going to talk about 3 broad areas that these prevention curriculum may focus on or incorporate into their strategy. We're then going to shift into some of the curricula that we know are popular ones that get used often. Then we're going to talk about some special considerations around gender-specific programming, inclusivity. What about if you create your own curriculum or maybe make a hybrid curriculum? And what if you're wanting to do with young students? And then we're going to end with some questions, opportunity for you to ask any questions that you have. So we're going to start with a quick review of basic prevention concepts. And if this is an interesting section and you want to learn more about the public health approach to prevention, I want to encourage you to go view our Prevention 101. And I'm checking in the chat box to make sure we have sound for everyone. It looks like everybody I'm seeing is saying they can hear. Oh, someone cannot hear. In Wilson, I am not sure, but everyone else is saying they're hearing. So if you need to log out and back in, that may help. So our quick prevention concept review. The first thing that we want to talk about is what we call our social ecological model. There's a few key pieces to this social ecological model, and one of them is this idea of risk and protective factors. So a risk factor is anything that increases the likelihood of violence occurring, even if it's not causal. And a protective factor is anything that decreases the likelihood of violence occurring or that increases resilience. So for risk factors, that's anything that's statistically associated with an increase in the likelihood of someone either experiencing or perpetrating sexual violence, even if it's not directly linked to the cause. So it's important to remember that risk factors are not just for experiencing sexual violence, there are also known risk factors for perpetrating sexual violence. The same with protective factors. Those decrease the likelihood of someone experiencing or perpetrating sexual violence, or they can increase someone's resilience and ability to heal and move through and feel supported if they do experience sexual violence. It mitigates some of those harmful outcomes that sexual violence, some of the harmful impacts that sexual violence may cause. So we also have this idea of different levels that risk and protective factors exist at. They can be at the individual level, relationship, community, or society level. Now, we know that these risk factors and protective factors exist at each level of the social ecological model. So if we want to do comprehensive, effective prevention, we are going to be implementing a comprehensive strategy that also targets each of these levels. Traditionally, when we think about sexual violence prevention strategies, we think about like teaching individuals strategies and for, trying to protect themselves in some way. And so we end up accidentally leaning into these victim blaming narratives. When we look at this whole context, even if we teach someone healthy relationship skills, red flags, how to resolve conflict, if we're putting them back out there in the same community and society that normalize sexual violence, then they're still limited in how they're going to be able to navigate their lives with safety for themselves and their community. So we know effective prevention needs to be targeting those community and society levels of the social ecological model as well. So there are some known protective factors related to victimization or perpetration of sexual violence. And here's what a few of those are. Connection to a caring adult. These are the known protective factors. I wanted to make sure I said that right. So some known protective factors: connection to a caring adult, association with pro-social peers, skills in solving problems nonviolently, connection or commitment to school, and community support or connectedness. So those are some of the protective factors that the research shows us helps reduce the likelihood of someone experiencing or perpetrating sexual violence, or improves their outcomes if they do experience it. And there are some known risk factors for victimization or perpetration of sexual violence, and those include an adherence to traditional gender norms, a lack of nonviolent problem-solving skills, community violence, general tolerance of sexual violence within the community, harmful societal norms around masculinity and femininity, and cultural norms that support aggression towards others. So these are in the research literature as known risk factors for experiencing or perpetrating sexual violence. There are a handful of practices we know create more effective prevention. So the literature shows us that there are certain ways of doing prevention that have a better impact, a bigger impact, a more long-lasting impact. And so we've distilled some of these down for you. So good prevention is going to be comprehensive, meaning it's going to have a variety of strategies that work together at multiple levels of the social ecological model. It's going to involve varied teaching methods, so you're reaching a variety of learners and keeping the material engaging. It's going to have a sufficient dosage. So when you think about that, I want you to think of deeper saturation of a smaller number of audiences. So if your prevention strategy is that you want to give as many 30-minute presentations at groups in your community as possible, you're going to be less effective because you're spreading this super short, thin layer of messaging across such a wide audience. You're going to be more effective if you take a small group of people and give them maybe a 4, 6, 8-part sessions, series of sessions where they're able to go more deeply with the material and really start to see some changes in those beliefs and skill sets and confidence. So aim for deeper saturation of smaller audiences, because then that audience is going to be able to start to shift some of the norms in the communities around them. Effective prevention is theory-driven. That means that it's either evidence-based or evidence-informed. It has a logical rationale behind why it was developed the way that it is. It draws upon current research on violence prevention to inform its approach. It's going to build positive relationships, especially between young people and adults. And I know a lot of times we get so focused on building positive relationships for children who have struggles with their family to help them have positive relationships with other adults in their lives. I want to encourage you to also think about ways that we can support those families that are struggling and help those adults in their lives have more of what they need to have better relationships with their kids. So building positive relationships all around so that youth have a variety of adults that they can trust in their lives. Effective prevention is going to be appropriately timed, so we're going to be reaching people with the messaging that they need at age-appropriate levels. If the first time anyone's ever heard the idea of consent is when they're 16, you're going to miss out on an opportunity to really lay that foundation. So start reaching people with these age-appropriate messages from the time that they're young, so that we're normalizing concepts like consent and bodily autonomy and social emotional skills and learning about feelings and conflict resolution and good communication from the time they're young, because these lay the foundation so that by the time they're teenagers and up, they understand and can internalize and integrate these messages that we're giving them in our prevention more effectively. Effective prevention is going to be socioculturally relevant, and what we mean by that is that it's going to be relevant to the people that we're talking to. It's going to be informed by the needs of the communities. Frequently, it's going to be driven from within the communities. If we are going into to communities that we know have more risk factors for sexual violence, and we're reaching them with a message that was developed for other communities, it's not going to make as much sense. It's not going to be as effective. So making sure our prevention is socioculturally relevant is important. Good prevention evaluates its outcomes, and what we mean by that is that you have a very clear logic to what your program is. These are our goals. These are the strategies that we are using to reach our goals. Here is how we're going to measure if we're meeting our goals. And then you evaluate whether or not you're meeting those goals so that you can find out if what you're doing is working. Because I don't know about you, but most nonprofits don't have money and, excuse me, most nonprofits don't have money and staff. And Anna, are you, I just want to check and make sure. Can anyone else hear me? I know Anna is having a hard time with audio. Is anyone else able to hear? Okay, so I'm going to keep going. Cool. Thank y'all for the feedback. Hopefully Anna can get connected with us pretty well. So let me make one quick shift and make sure that I have Gabriella on as a panelist with who is our staff, so that if something happens and Anna drops out and rejoins, we can make sure we have her in as a panelist as well. Okay, sorry about that, technical difficulties. Okay, so once you have your outcomes clarified and your strategies for reaching those outcomes, then you're positioned in a good place to evaluate your outcomes. Like most nonprofits, you probably don't have money just like falling through your window every time you open it. Otherwise, we'd have a whole lot of fresh air here. So if you've got limited staff time, limited money, you don't want to be spending your resources and your time on things that don't even work. So if you're doing 5 different strategies in your community and you evaluate them and you find that 3 of them are meeting the outcomes and goals that you're hoping for, and that 2 of them are just consistently not meeting it, even when you try improving them, well, then maybe you need to replace those 2 ineffective strategies with something that's working better, right? So that's the importance of outcome evaluation. It's not just a box we check to make our funders happy, although they do tend to like to see that. It is something that we do so we can continue making our programming better and stronger and more effective. And the final thing is that good prevention uses well-trained staff. And what I mean by that is that you want people teaching sexual violence prevention who are trained in the dynamics of sexual violence, the dynamics of power and control, that are trained on multiple root causes and risk factors and protective factors at different levels of the social ecological model. You want people who are trained in trauma-informed practice, because any of you who have done prevention or awareness in your communities have probably found that frequently when you're speaking to your communities, you might receive a disclosure, or you might notice that someone in your audience has had something kicked up for them from their own history. And so we want people giving this programming who have a solid amount of training on trauma-informed practice, so they can hold that space thoughtfully and with care. So we hear a lot about evidence-based, and I want to be really clear about what evidence-based is, because a lot of times we hear that word used in a way where people kind of use it as, it makes sense to me, like it's evidence-based. I looked at it, it makes sense based on, you know, my lived experience. I think it'll work. It's evidence-based. We know evidence-based is a good thing. We know that that's something that we should aspire towards, even though there are a variety of reasons why we might not be able to, and we'll talk about those in this webinar too. But I want to encourage you to not use that word loosely. I want to kind of go through some definitions. When we talk about evidence-based or evidence-informed, here's 3 levels we're talking about, okay? So something is evidence-informed when it's an emerging practice. So what an emerging practice means is that it's based on guidelines, protocol standards, or preferred practice patterns that have been proven in the public health field to lead to effective outcomes. An emerging practice also incorporates a process of continual quality improvement and has an evaluation plan in place to measure its outcomes. It might not yet have its evaluation data to show that it's effective, but we've built it based on what, we start. If you want to create an emerging practice, which is evidence-informed, you start by reviewing what curricula are already out there. If I look at the research studies that showed the effectiveness of this curricula, what did they find worked well? What did they find didn't work well? And then how can I take that knowledge, add my own piece to it, maybe making it culturally specific or relevant for the community that I work in, and then create something that draws upon the best ideas from these evidence-based curricula to create something new. And then if you want to create an emerging practice, you set up an evaluation plan. And if you're doing that, you could speak with our program evaluator, Anna, or you could partner with some other evaluation specialist who could help you plan your program with evaluation in mind so you can see if what you're doing is working. That's an emerging practice, that's evidence-informed. If you hear us say a promising practice, which is also evidence-informed, a promising practice is once you have your emerging practice and you've been evaluating it for a few different iterations, you've maybe tried it in a couple of different settings, you're finding that the research points to it being positive in terms of its outcomes, but maybe we haven't replicated it in enough settings, we haven't researched it for as long, maybe we want to wait and follow up in a year or two, to follow up every 6 months to see if the changes we see last. That's a promising practice. So we're starting to evaluate our emerging practice, and that we would also refer to as evidence-informed, and evidence-informed is good. And then after a period of time, it can become a best practice or evidence-based. And what we mean by that is it's been reviewed and substantiated by experts in the public health or education field according to the standards of research. It's replicable and it produces desirable results in a variety of settings, and it clearly links the positive effects to program, to your curriculum, and not to other factors that may not have to do with your curriculum. So that's how a program becomes evidence-based, and that usually means you partner with a research university or a research institution to have public health researchers partner with you to evaluate your program. As you can imagine, that is not cheap or easy or accessible for a lot of people, so there's a lot of really good evidence-informed curricula out there that are not evidence-based because the process of becoming evidence-based is expensive, not accessible to people who are developing culturally specific programming for marginalized communities. It takes a long time. A lot of the programs that we know are evidence-based were created 20 years ago. So they may be dated and need more revisions and updates. So evidence-informed is good, but I want to be
Can you hear me now? I'm going to go with my computer audio. Okay, I was on my phone because that's usually more reliable, and my phone cut out. Okay, so even when we say something is evidence-informed, we still mean that it started with a review of what was out there that's evidence-based already. The CDC has a technical package, the Stop SV technical package to prevent sexual violence, that's available at the CDC's website. So you can search this document, and it has a lot of information about evidence-based and evidence-informed strategies to prevent sexual violence. So I'm going to turn it at this point over to Anna.
Hello, everybody. My name is Anna Wallen, and I am the Program Evaluator at NCCASA. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to continue our discussion as we move into the area where we'll discuss the three broad areas of curriculum focus, and then we'll discuss some specific curriculums that use different elements of these theories or approaches. So the three types of curriculums we're going to discuss are ones that focus on healthy relationships, community level interventions, and then ones that focus on a bystander approach or bystander framework. Next slide. So curriculums that focus on healthy relationship development and healthy relationship skills are usually focused on interpersonal relationships and romantic dating relationships or friendships, more so than opposed to like group level or community types of relationships. They teach skills for healthy ways of relating that include communication skills, recognizing and setting boundaries, and social emotional skills like recognizing emotions in oneself and in others, and self-soothing. It also defines elements of healthy and unhealthy relationships, or red flags, or different things to notice in behavior of others or yourself, and identifies common controlling or abusive behaviors that come up in relationships, as well as addressing directly the concept of power and control, ways to evaluate power dynamics in relationships to make sure that they're equal, and also generally directly names individuals' rights to function autonomously without being controlled by somebody's partner. The next style of curriculum uses community level interventions. So that could also be referred to in some curriculums as school level intervention, or culture shifting intervention, or refers to school climate. And there are lots of different community level ways that we engage. It could be in the city or neighborhood, but in this case, usually the intervention is within the school, because that is where most education is taking place and where young people engage in a lot of their relationships and spend time. So we'll be talking about curriculums that take place in a school setting, but could also be adapted to other spaces where youth spend time, like a Boys and Girls Club or other community settings. So cultural interventions address broad cultural elements of values, norms, and attitudes about who we are as a group and what values we have together. Focuses on awareness of healthy ways to engage others, being responsible for the health of our community, as opposed to shaming what are considered unhealthy or bad behaviors. Community level interventions address group level relationships. So usually the activities involve large groups of people engaging with one another that communicate specific values and develop goals together. And that could include painting murals together, different arts-based projects that discuss specific anti-violence values in the community, doing pledges or drives, using cultural specific tools for messaging, campaigns, peer education, sports, and posters. You can see the image on the left is part of the package of one of the curriculums we're going to discuss today, called Shifting Boundaries. And it is has a concept that even just putting up posters can also be a passive way of changing culture, that indicates to people visually that, we do discuss interpersonal violence in our community or in our school, and that we do not tolerate interpersonal violence, and that there is help available for people who might be experiencing that. So even without having a direct conversation about violence, posters do communicate values and can contribute to shifting culture. And the third type of curriculum that we're going to discuss is bystander intervention. So bystander intervention focuses on developing a sense of personal responsibility and identity as a community member. The bystander method promotes concept of proactive, pro-social behavior as opposed to passivity or identification with lack of connection to others or lack of responsibility for the well-being of others. Bystander intervention is built on research and psychology and addresses different elements of why people do and don't intervene in situations with other people, and includes how we develop beliefs about ourselves and about others that motivate our behavior.
I'm getting unmuted. So thank you so much, Anna. So the bystander model, which we'll find that none of these curricula are really divided by this curriculum is only this one thing. They all kind of hopefully bring together multiple of these focuses in their work that they do. So bystander is built on the idea of that people are more likely to intervene if they can overcome common challenges to intervening. And so one of those predictors for intervention is whether or not someone has what they call a diffusion of responsibility. And what that means is that individuals are less likely to respond when more people are around because everybody assumes someone else is going to take care of it. So an effective bystander intervention strategy is going to work at helping people know how and to take responsibility even when there's other people around. Bystander intervention tries to overcome evaluation apprehension, which is where people are less likely to respond in a high-risk situation because they're afraid they're going to look foolish. What if I'm reading the situation wrong? What if I look silly? What if something, what if I get called out? So bystander intervention tries to overcome that challenge. It also addresses pluralistic ignorance. Which is the likelihood that when people are faced with this ambiguous but possibly high-risk situation, they're going to watch what the people around them do when deciding whether or not to respond and follow the cues that they're getting from people around them. So bystander intervention curricula want to empower people to feel more confident in assessing what a situation is so they can intervene, which is how it builds confidence and skills, because people are more likely to intervene in a high-risk situation when they feel confident in their ability to do so effectively. And also modeling, and so they're more likely to intervene when they've seen someone else model active bystander behaviors before. So we want to normalize that concept of intervention in the school or other community that we're working in, so that people have more models for that and are more likely to take action. We're going to go through a review of some of the evidence-based curricula that we know are commonly used in sexual and partner violence prevention. One of them is Safe Dates. Safe Dates is a bit of an older program. It's a dating abuse prevention program. It has 9 sessions of curriculum. It involves also a play about dating abuse that students can perform for the school. It also includes a poster contest. It has parent materials that you can use to share with parents what the curriculum is about, and a teacher training outline. And you can see the session topics here to the right. Those include defining a caring relationship. What does a healthy relationship look like? What does dating abuse look like? Talks a little bit about why people abuse, and then there's 2 sections on how to help friends, and both of those address how to respond to friends who maybe are showing red flags in their conversations for experiencing sexual violence or partner violence, but also how to intervene if you have a friend that sounds like maybe they're enacting controlling behavior on a friend. It has some content on overcoming gender stereotypes and fostering equal power through communication. A section on dealing with feelings and communication, and then a section on preventing sexual assault. So these sessions are designed to be 50-minute sessions, 9 50-minute sessions, but they do recognize we can't always get in for the full program. So they do offer some suggested options for combining content either into 6 sessions or 4 sessions. It's targeted for middle and high school students. And some of the key conceptual frameworks are healthy relationships, recognizing signs of abuse. There is some education on bystander intervention, and some emphasis on building community responsibility for the safety of our peers. There is an NCCASA supplement for safe dates. So if you are using safe dates in your school, you will want to reach out to us. In your program, you're going to want to reach out to us, and we can send you the supplement that has some additional role plays and potential modifications for the program. In the evaluation of safe dates, what they found is that students who received it reported perpetrating less psychological and sexual abuse at all 4 annual follow-up periods compared with the control group. They also reported perpetrating less moderate abuse than the control group. Those who reported at the onset of the curriculum that they had not perpetrated severe physical perpetration, then at the end of the program, they reported significantly less severe violence perpetration. However, those who at the onset of the program had already reported perpetrating some severe physical violence did not show an improvement after the curriculum. There was a moderate effect of the curriculum on reducing physical violence victimization, and there was a marginal effect of the curriculum on reducing sexual violence victimization. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anna.
Thank you. Okay, so our next curriculum is called Shifting Boundaries. And this is a healthy relationships focused curriculum. Mainly, it also has a cultural component called hotspot mapping, which we'll discuss in more detail in the next few slides. So Shifting Boundaries offers slightly different curriculum for 6th and 7th graders. It's generally based on defining personal boundaries and has some activities and video and discussion around what does respecting boundaries look and feel like, and offers some conflict management and communication skills. So 6th graders have 4 sessions. They're generally around 50 minutes. And then it ends in the last session doing the hotspot mapping or the safe space mapping in the school. 7th graders have 6 sessions, and that includes the discussion and definition of boundaries, why it's important to respect boundaries, what do your own boundaries feel like, and then also incorporates for the 7th graders some extra sessions on defining gender stereotypes, rape myths, and then you can see class session number 3, this activity called Big Deal or No Big Deal, kind of outlines some common harassing experiences or inappropriate ways of engaging somebody that could be harassment or boundary crossing, and talking about how we define whether or not different types of behaviors are appropriate. And that's similar with the Says Who questionnaire on class number 5. And then of course the 7th graders also finish with their last session with mapping the school for unsafe spaces. It doesn't necessarily offer rationale for why the 7th graders have 2 extra classes, so that could be something if you wanted to incorporate those activities into 6th grade lessons that may or may not be appropriate depending on how you've evaluated your audience. Next slide. Okay, so we've covered 6th graders have 4 sessions, 7th graders have 6 sessions, different materials are handouts, there is a video, and then interactive activities where students are moving around the space in the activities to identify boundaries and how we interact with other people's boundaries. And then there is some sessions that address rape myths and gender stereotypes. Next slide. Here's another element that's included in this curriculum package. It's called the Respecting Boundaries Agreement. And so it is a paper form that's to be filled out with an adult with students who have a conflict with one another. And it's generally used after a conflict has already occurred as a tool to for them to discuss what has happened, identify different types of boundary violations that may have occurred for either student, and planning out more pro-social behaviors that either of them could engage in the future, and identifying healthy ways of interacting with others, or identifying their own needs around healthy interactions or having their boundaries respected. So this is another element of this curriculum that adds another layer to the community values or community intervention, that if it's used consistently with all teachers and staff throughout the school, it helps sort of instigate perception in the school culture about how conflict is managed and how boundaries are respected throughout the school as a norm. Next slide. So here is an example of the shifting boundaries hotspot mapping activity. This is a generic school map that is offered in the curriculum. Some schools that have implemented hotspot mapping have chosen to use an accurate map of their actual school. A generic map can also work as long as you label different spaces that might be different in your school, like with classroom numbers or teachers' names on classrooms, to make sure that you're getting specific information about the specific school you're working with. So the first step is that students are all given their own individual map and markers or crayons to color in the map in accordance with how safe they feel in each of those individual spaces. So they're only using 3 colors, yellow, green, and red. And they're gonna color, you're gonna instruct them to color in spaces where they feel unsafe or where they've had a specific unsafe experience with red. And then yellow is for spaces that are kind of in the middle where they might feel uncomfortable. Sometimes they're comfortable, they're not sure, and then have them color in green spaces in the spaces where they feel the most safe. And then also offering extra space to write either on the back of the map or on a different paper explanations for why they feel that way in certain spaces, if that's applicable or if they need to express that. And that's generally encouraged so you can get extra information about why spaces are safe or not. So after each individual child fills out their own map, it's collected by a teacher or whoever adult is implementing this data collection, and it's compiled into a master map to identify, which spaces were voted red by the most students, and so on, so that they can be identified. And then after that, you would move on to having a community discussion with staff, students, and administration about, why those spaces in the school are voted that color, and what should be done to address that. And so while it's really important to address the hot spots or the red places where students feel unsafe or that are problematic, it's also really important to hold up the green spaces and have a discussion about why students do feel like they have positive safety experiences or feel comfortable with certain people that are associated with spaces that they mark as green, and identifying how those qualities can also be expanded upon throughout the school. And then ultimately, it's important that the administration takes responsibility for implementing whatever remedies students and staff came up with together. Next slide. So an evaluation of shifting boundaries found that the community level intervention, or they called it building level intervention, which was the hotspot mapping, was the element of the curriculum that was most associated with effectively decreasing perpetration and victimization of both sexual violence and sexual harassment. So in this case, in this first study that they did that was evaluated, the building level intervention included not only the hotspot mapping activity, but also a poster campaign, which could either be using the pre-made posters or encouraging students to make their own posters about healthy relationships, anti-bullying, anti-violence, and putting up both kinds of posters around the school. This particular implementation of shifting boundaries included restraining orders, and it was not detailed clearly how those restraining orders were implemented within the school or what exactly that looked like. But there was some kind of system for if students were having conflicts with each other consistently, for making sure that those students were not in the same spaces with each other, and it might have utilized the safe boundaries agreement that we discussed earlier, but it wasn't entirely clear what they meant by restraining orders. And then, of course, the main thing that maintained the efficacy of the hotspot intervention was that the faculty followed up with increased staff presence in the unsafe areas to monitor student behavior. And there might be other types of interventions that you could use in your school, just depending on the space, the geography of the school, the student makeup, and lots of different things like that. But it did identify that doing the classroom curriculum alone had very little to no effect. And so we really want to highlight here that if you're thinking about doing shifting boundaries, it is essential that you use the community level intervention and integrate some of those types of community culture changing interventions into your implementation, or else it will really not be effective. Next slide. Okay, so the next curriculum that we're going to discuss is called Green Dot, and the Green Dot also integrates some different types of styles, including healthy relationship discussions, community level intervention, and also some bystander training. So Green Dot happens in several different phases. The first one is actually a 50-minute motivational speech to the whole school. So kind of an assembly style gathering in an auditorium, and there's one person giving a speech to the school that is sort of introducing the concept of the Green Dot curriculum, the concept of bystander intervention, the concept of community responsibility, and sort of inviting everybody into this Green Dot culture, this mindset that each individual has responsibility to create safety in their school and responsibility to help others who need help. And so during that motivational speech, students are invited to participate in the second phase, which is more small group intensive trainings with staff, either implementation staff from Green Dot organization or whoever has been designated in the school to implement the curriculum, to learn more about healthy relationships, abuse red flags, and different bystander skills for recognizing when to intervene. And so students voluntarily join these small group trainings and can participate of their own choosing. And then the third session intentionally identifies what they refer to as peer opinion leaders. So that refers to students within the school who have social influence on others, students who are well known and recognized by other students and staff, students who are recognized as already being leaders or having exceptional social skills or other types of influence, and really encouraging using that psychological and social psychology concept of peer influence and recognizing that that already has a lot of power in group settings and especially in schools with young people. And so encouraging these young people to become leaders and become advocates throughout the school of Green Dot culture and continually speaking out against interpersonal violence, and then helping to design different activities that could promote bystander values throughout the school. Next slide. So the number of sessions can vary depending on the approach by the school. Every time you do Green Dot, it's going to start off with that motivational speech and then include at least 2 small group trainings that incorporate healthy relationship skills and bystander intervention. You could do more trainings after that, depending on how many students are in the school and adult staffing resources. This curriculum is adaptable for middle school through college, and there is a K-3 adaptation that's being developed right now. Whoever's implementing this curriculum, you will need strong commitment from school administration, because the implementation tends to be quite thorough, and all of the interventions or the evaluations that I read did continue the curriculum throughout several years to be fully impactful. And so you definitely need a commitment from the school administration to agree to have you working on this for quite a while. Key conceptual frameworks: social saturation, pro-social behavior, peer influence, and some of the risk and protective factors that this addresses, even though that the curriculum does not refer specifically to risk and protective factors, it does address connection to school, association with pro-social peers, and it counters the general acceptance or tolerance of sexual violence. Next slide. So here you can see a picture. It's an example of a green dot fair that one school instituted before a high school football game. So, you know, depending on what the school culture is already like, you know, I think that this school already had a really strong sports program, and that was why they decided to integrate Green Dot into their sports program, as well as that was already has an influence on the school culture, like many schools. And so that was a really key way to kind of spread the Green Dot culture and the message of healthy relationships and bystander responsibility, was by bringing in the sports element, which I think was really interesting and a really great way to get that integrated more fully. So they did these randomized controlled trials in high schools throughout Kentucky, which is where Green Dot was initially developed at a college in Kentucky. And in the third and fourth year of the trials was where they really started to see significant decrease in interpersonal violence, 17 to 21% decrease, total sexual violence, which included victimization and perpetration. And then they also kind of parsed out the different elements of the curriculum in their evaluation, just like in shifting boundaries to evaluate which parts of it were effective, which is great. They had some schools that only used the motivational speech, and then some schools that used all of the different elements of the curriculum. And it did show, interestingly, that the students who only received a motivational speech did report some level of intention to intervene and some basic awareness of signs of unhealthy interpersonal relationships to look out for. However, of course, it was not as strong or impactful as the schools that had full integration of peer opinion leaders and integration of different cultural elements like this fair, where everybody could be involved. They also recognize that there is a possible efficacy of booster doses. So after all the classroom sessions are over, it might be effective to, say, 6 or 12 months afterwards, bring in and have another motivational speech for the entire school to just kind of reinforce those concepts or those values again, and that could potentially be effective as well. Next slide. And our next curriculum that we're going to discuss is called Bringing in the Bystander. And on their website, they use the language that their approach is referred to as community of responsibility. So this lays out clearly, it has 7 sessions. They're 45 minutes each. The age group could be middle through college. It was also originally developed as a college level curriculum similar to Green Dot and has since been adapted to middle and high school ages. These are generally all classroom sessions, although they do bring in concepts of bystander intervention, community responsibility, and also identifying those basic healthy relationship key concepts that we discussed earlier as well, and recognizing risky situations and abuse, and talking about different ways to intervene, obstacles to intervention that Christy outlined earlier, and making people aware of basic bystander psychology so that they know when they might be experiencing less confidence to intervene, and how that's affecting their own behavior so that they can move past those obstacles and be effective bystanders. Next slide. So in the high school curriculum, these 7 modules kind of move through identifying different relationship skills. In the first couple sessions, identifying relationship abuse, identifying and defining what sexual assault is, and then module 3 discusses more of the spectrum of abuse, what are different types of behaviors that may or may not be abusive, and how you can know. And then modules 4 and 5 introduce the bystander framework and the participants' role in creating a healthy community. These modules also teach participants how to recognize common dynamics of relationship abuse and sexual assault. And then the last sessions engage participants directly in skill building activities so that they can recognize themselves as bystanders and feel confident that they have the skills and the knowledge to intervene in effective ways. Next slide. So the risk and protective factors addressed here also are going to address the attitude of complacency towards sexual violence, increases association with pro-social peers, developing pro-social relationships, and then also builds those hard skills to address conflict in appropriate and safe ways. So the evaluation of bringing in the bystander in terms of efficacy, they found that recognition among participants of bystander opportunities and identification with proactive helping behaviors did increase for up to a year after they took the training. And then around that year mark, those skills and abilities to recognize bystander opportunities started to decline after that. And so if you're considering booster doses or integrating something that's more community intervention aligned after that year of bringing the bystander, that could be a good time to do another communal activity or a motivational assembly or something that sort of reevaluates what those goals are and what those values of bystander culture are in that school. And then also they did do track some data on beliefs about rape myths, just to see if the bystander training helped to dissect some of those beliefs about gender stereotypes and rape myths, and this particular curriculum was not effective in changing acceptance of rape myths, even though participants did gain skills in intervening or considering themselves to have responsibility for the well-being of others. Most people still did believe in some victim-blaming myths. Next slide. Okay, and I'll pass it back off to Chrissy to discuss special considerations in curriculum.
Okay, thanks, Anna. So some special considerations we're going to talk about today. One of them is that I want to address human trafficking prevention, because I know that especially with North Carolina mandating that students receive sex trafficking prevention education in the schools, that some of our local programs have received requests to provide that education. So I wanted to let you know that I'm available to help you talk through what those options are to make sure you're prepared to do that. We also have an anti-human trafficking specialist, Courtney, at NCCASA, and we can help you strengthen your human trafficking prevention. We have a handful of resources that are available to help you with that. One of them, we spent the summer developing a human trafficking prevention curriculum matrix, where we surveyed several of the curricula that are out there that are available available for use in North Carolina, and we created a document that lays out basic information about them. How many sessions? How do you get it into your classroom? Who teaches it? What topics are covered? Was it informed by survivors in its creation? And then what risk and protective factors and content areas does it address? So this is a great resource. I know Gabriella just put a link to it in the chat box. So if you want to go see our human trafficking prevention curriculum matrix, that'll give you some ideas about what curricula are out there. I want to mention there's only one evidence-based curriculum for sex trafficking prevention, and it's My Life, My Choice, which is only for adolescent girls and requires implementation with a clinician and a survivor leader. So it's not super helpful for widespread use, and it's not gender inclusive, but it is evidence-based. The rest of what's out there, some of it is evidence informed, and this matrix can help you kind of see how different curricula approach human trafficking prevention. We also recently created a human trafficking prevention infographic that is out there. It's just a very simple 2-page document that lays out an overview to our approach to human trafficking prevention. I am currently working on a human trafficking prevention toolkit that's not out yet, but it should be out in the next few weeks. That's going to take that infographic and go into more detail. And then beginning in October, we're going to have a reframing human trafficking prevention training cohort that's going to start in October and be 4 sessions. It is operating as a cohort, so when you sign up, you're signing up for all 4 sessions. They do build on each other. They will be once weekly on Monday afternoons. It'll be free for NCCASA members who are accepted. So be on the lookout in NCCASA's emails and social media for the announcement about registration for that. Another special consideration is gender-specific programs. So we know statistically the majority of sexual violence, even violence against men and boys, is perpetrated by men and boys. So there are some curricula out there that are targeted specifically for boys and men, with curricula that are meant to counter harmful gender narratives about masculinity and help young people understand how this certain kind of gender norm is not necessary to being a healthy or confident young man or boy. So curricula, it's important that curricula that are targeted at men and boys engage people as allies and bystanders, but also that it allows for the reality that men and boys can and do experience sexual violence. So this is one thing to consider when evaluating programming for men and boys, is if it only discusses masculinity in the context of, you know, avoiding perpetrating sexual violence, it's going to miss out on the fact that a good percentage of the boys and men in any attendance audience are going to be survivors as well and need some support around unpacking how that survivorship intersects with their gender identity. A couple of examples of curriculum targeted at men and boys. One of them is called Coaching Boys into Men. This is a program where it trains high school coaches to mentor youth on relationship skills and nonviolent problem solving. We know that a lot of young boys and men who are involved in sports really trust and lean into the wisdom of their coaches and have a very solid relationship with them. So this is to empower those coaches to enact transformative change in the lives of the students that they're coaching. There's also curriculum out of Greensboro from Children's Home Society called Wise Guys, The Next Level. Wise Guys is targeted at men and boys. What I think is neat about the way it approaches it is that it looks at these gender norms, some of the harmful pieces of traditional gender norms, and how it impacts the overall health and wellness of men and boys. So it's not just looking at it through the lens of here's how to not use those gender norms to cause sexual or partner violence, but it's also looking at things like how do these expectations that are unrealistic impact things like, you know, heart disease and blood pressure and overall health and wellness. So it's sort of a holistic program, and I like that emphasis. You are going to want to make sure that your programming is LGBTQ inclusive, and remember that anyone of any gender can be a harm doer or a survivor. So sometimes when we lean into these frameworks and messaging and scenarios and role plays that are very gendered and very heteronormative, what we forget is that we're probably speaking to an audience that includes LGBTQ people and who may have experienced harm from someone of the same gender of them. Or it may be someone in our audience who was harmed where it was a male survivor who was harmed by a woman. So we want to be really careful to use role plays and scenarios that sometimes have either names that sound like they're the same gender or that use gender neutral names, so we aren't leaning as heavily into painting a picture of what sexual and partner violence look like, because when we use these scenarios that are very gendered, people just don't see themselves in the stories that we're sharing. And that means that if you have an LGBTQ person in your audience who's experienced partner violence and needs support or needs to understand what's happening, they may not realize how your scenario relates to their experiences. And you want to remember that men and boys can be survivors also, and avoid only engaging them as allies. And you may be thinking, well, in my community or in my schools, I don't really think there's any LGBTQ people I'm doing my prevention programming with, but you're probably wrong, because whether it's a rural setting or an urban setting, a school or a community setting, there are always LGBTQ people in your audience. They may not be out to you. They may be lesbian, gay, or bisexual and not out. You may not know, so don't make assumptions about your attendees' orientation. And also don't assume everyone in your audience is cisgender. And what we mean by cisgender is someone whose gender identity matches the gender they were assigned at birth. You may have people in your audience who are transgender but have not come out yet. You may also have people in your audience who are transgender and have maybe been out and living as their gender for a while now, and you may just not realize it. So you're not always going to know if someone in your audience is trans or lesbian, gay, or bisexual. So assume you have people in your audience who are LGBTQ. And sometimes you may want to create a curriculum or do a mix. I know that for our RPE subrecipients, the CDC does not require that you used an evidence-based curriculum. But they do want you to say, if you're using a curriculum that is not evidence-based in terms of research and evaluation, that you want to be able to explain the rationale why. So some of our preventionists in the state use curriculum that they have developed in-house based on existing evidence and best practices. So they have people who are experienced preventionists who've reviewed what is out there that is evidence-based and drawn upon the best pieces of that wisdom to create a curriculum that's a good fit for their community. Some of them make minor modifications to an existing evidence-based curriculum to better reflect their community and local program. They may also hybridize it. They may do some of the lessons from safe dates to focus on healthy relationships, and maybe use a special session on bystander intervention, and then add the hotspot mapping from shifting boundaries so that they've got a building level intervention. So there's ways you can piece it together. However, when these curricula were evaluated, they were evaluated as a whole package. So if you're changing up the pieces, you may be messing with the parts that were evaluated as part of the effectiveness of the program. So if you want to consider making adaptations or creating your own curriculum, you are welcome to consult with Anna, who's our program evaluator, who's on this webinar with me today, and that way you can ensure that you're not losing or changing the elements that are essential to evaluated program success. So having some conversations about what that modification might look like can help you make better choices. Some of our preventionists want to do work with elementary and younger students. And so an example of that, OCRCC, they've developed their own curriculum, but both their high school and their curriculum for younger students, they developed in-house. Theirs for younger students is called Safe Touch. And Safe Touch focuses on helping kids understand safe or confusing kinds of touch and what to do if they experience that. There are other programs in the state that are using social emotional learning curriculum, such as Toolbox. We do know that when we start younger children doing things, lessons that help them with things like learning how to identify and understand their feelings, know what social safety looks like and feels like, how to set and respect other people's boundaries. We know that this kind of social emotional learning lays the foundation for sexual violence prevention messaging later. So at this point, I think I want to open it up in the chat box and see if anyone has any questions. Does anyone have any questions for us? Okay. Well, if there are not any questions, I want to make sure you all know that you can definitely email either of us. Oh, so we do have a question, and I'm going to go ahead and work on that. So someone, oh yes, so looking for grooming behaviors in volunteers. So this is one of the things that I know we have people want additional training on a regular basis, is making sure your team is trained to be attentive, not just to teaching students how to manage their relationships with each other, but also making sure everyone is trained about what does a proper relationship between an adult and a young person look like. So making sure people understand power dynamics is really important. I know I'm going to be doing a training for a school district in the next few weeks, and we have several parts of that training that are addressing things like there's a power differential. If you're in a relationship with someone who you met as a and by relationship I can mean any kind of friendship, working relationship. If you're in a relationship with someone who you met through a mentoring or leadership capacity, that's a power differential. That person, especially if they're younger, and absolutely if they're a minor, but even if they're a young adult, if they met you through a mentoring or teaching or therapeutic kind of relationship, that's a power differential. That means that that person may be idealizing you. They may not feel like they can tell you no. We know that frequently, especially with people who've experienced past trauma or sexual harm, that sometimes having an adult or a trusted mentor who's showing interest and affection toward you can be very confusing. So making sure that you have really solid training for your people about what a healthy relationship between a mentor or volunteer and a young person that you're working with looks like, so that we have really strong boundaries around that. Strong boundaries and strong protocols. Are there any other questions? And if you don't have a question, you can always email one of us. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining. Email if you have any questions, and I appreciate you being here with us today. Thanks, y'all.